It's Golden Corral's Wings and Rib Fest. Hurry in for fall-apart baby back ribs. And wings just like you like them. All you can eat every night. Start the car. Golden Corral. Your choice rules.
It's Nutrisystem's Red Hot Sale. Celebrate summer and save 40% off every program, including Turbo 13. Lose up to 13 pounds and 7 inches overall in your first month. Lose weight now. Money back guaranteed.
I'm Marie and I lost 50 pounds with Nutrisystem.
I am so much healthier now.
Nutrisystem delivers your favorite foods made healthier. Perfectly portioned to fuel and satisfy.
Count, measure, meetings, not with Nutrisystem.
Order your 28-day program right now, and we'll rush you Turbo 13 with the new Turbo Takeoff Week with new foods, plus a week of probiotic and delicious Turbo Shakes free to shrink your belly and lose weight.
You'll see results your very first week.
For a limited time, save 40% off every program.
Nutrisystem works.
Do it. Do it now. Don't wait.
Go online or call 888-455-DIET and get shakes free, plus 40% off every program.
Stop fearing your alarm clock with new ZzzQuil Pure Z's, a drug-free blend of botanicals with melatonin that supports your natural sleep cycle, so you can seize the morning. New ZzzQuil Pure Z's.
Discover the newest way to create a style all your own. The HSN Style Edit, a curated look at the season's best, most original finds for every part of your life. We decode the trends, share tips and how-tos, and give you the inspiration you need to style it your way. It's the joy of the hunt and the thrill of the find. Your unique style is here. Discover it now, exclusively at hsn.com.
Welcome to Aguiar Pavers.
Aguiar Pavers creates beautiful paving stone driveways. Whether it's your dream fixer-upper or you're looking for that wow factor, Aguiar Pavers, paving your way home.
My cholesterol is borderline. I figure I can worry about it or do something about it. Garlic helps maintain healthy cholesterol safely and naturally. It's pharmacist recommended and it's odor-free. I'm taking charge of my cholesterol with Garlic.
Every student should have the tools they need to pursue their dreams. That's why during August for Subaru Loves Learning,
Mind if I sign one?
Absolutely.
they'll be purchasing, donating, and delivering science books to local schools. Visit a participating Subaru retailer to write a message.
Here you go.
And help inspire curious minds in your community to learn even more. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
I think he's out of control. He has the steering wheel of the American vehicle in his hands, and he's veering wildly right now. He's trying to preserve and protect himself. And so what more demonstration do you want? When things get really, really bad? You know, I'm glad that if his revoking of my security clearance is going to wake some people up.
Former CIA Chief John Brennan spoke with my colleague Rachel Maddow last night. His first interview since Trump revoked his security clearance for apparently political purposes. Meanwhile, dozens of former CIA officials, including several former directors, have signed onto letters opposing Trump's decision. Back with me, former CIA analyst Nada Bakos, who signed one of those protest letters, former FBI double agent Naveed Jamali, and Republican strategist Matt Makoviak. Let me go to you first, Matt. The president has had this unprecedented move of removing security clearance from Mr. Brennan, and many have objected to it for several different reasons, and many, including Nada, has said, well, this is just dead wrong. Yet we've not heard a lot of the Republican leadership speak in any collective about this issue either way. It seems to be like everyone seems to be on the Republican leadership side kind of ducking it or kind of playing it down. What sayeth thou, Matt?
What I'd say is a couple things, Reverend. First, it is the August recess. The House has been out of session, so they're not in Washington. The members are not getting asked lots of questions by media and with cameras in the Capitol. The Senate was in session last week. I think I saw Senator Susan Collins, a Republican of Maine, criticize this decision to pull Brennan's security clearance. I imagine over the next week there will be more conversation and more comments from leading Republicans. Here's what I really think happened. I really think this is about President Trump wanting to get the Omarosa story off cable news and out of the newspapers and out of the national debate. I think that they were undertaking a serious, more kind of independent process to review security clearances, and ultimately he decided to announce the Brennan one as a way to distract everyone from all the news surrounding Omarosa's tapes and her book. Obviously, that's not a reason to revoke a security clearance.
I mean, that's scary. You're going to take someone's security clearances, someone that could be helpful with advice, with sharing contacts that could be needed to secure the United States, and you're going to take that clearance away because you want to change the news cycle because it's going against you? That's scary, Matt, and you're a Republican saying that.
Well, that's what I think happened here, because if you look at the rollout of the decision, it was pretty confused. Initially, he said it wasn't even clear what the reason was or what the criteria was, and then ultimately he tied it to Russia, to the Russia investigation in some way. So I still don't really fully understand what the criteria was. There's no one is questioning whether he has the authority to do this. It's a question of whether it was the right decision, whether there was an independent criteria. And listen, the president shouldn't be punishing opponents by revoking security clearances. That's not why we have security clearances. The intelligence community has always been entirely independent of politics. In the last year, I think, to be fair, Reverend, we've seen some questions about some individuals in the intelligence community, perhaps a number of them in the FBI who've been demoted or who've retired over questions about the FBI investigation of the Hillary Clinton email situation. So there have been questions on both sides. What I would say is I don't support using the revocation of a security clearance for a political purpose or to change a narrative on cable news, which appears to be why he did it, when he did it. I think they need to have an independent criteria. I think that would be the right way to approach it.
Nada, why did you sign on? What was the reason that you signed on with others that took issue with this?
I signed the letter supporting the executives that were supporting former Director Brennan, because I don't think the president has the right, and I don't think he should be taking away people's security clearances based on them having a political opinion and having an opinion about his administration. Director Brennan has left the CIA. He's made these comments after he left the CIA. To me, this feels more like retribution and punishment. This wasn't based, as Matt said, on something specific that has to do with national security. This is based on Trump doesn't like what Brennan is saying. In the same way that he talks about fake news and cable TV and people shouldn't watch it, I think he's denigrating Brennan largely because he's speaking out against the Trump administration. And in effect, he's also having an impact on what people are watching.
Let me go to you then, Naveed. The danger of politicizing security clearances is that, are we going to now see where when a Democrat comes in, we're going to take all the clearances away from Republicans and vice versa, and soon we're really looking at it becoming just a political piece that we just give or take away based on the politics of the person, rather than their ability to really add to the security of the American people. And maybe I'm in a minority, but I think that is a frightening proposition.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and just to piggyback on what Nada is saying, look, two people that are not being sanctioned and having their security clearance revoked, Jared Kushner and Michael Flynn, who pled guilty. Look, I understand that this is, and Matt's right, this is probably a move to try to change the narrative by Donald Trump, but the reality is it actually does have a chilling impact on people much, much, much lower. I'm a minority. I'm a person of color. I've had to go through a 2-year process to get a security clearance. Nada had to go through a similar process. It's not a simple thing. You know, to sort of silence those voices, to come in and say, hey, you might be a registered Democrat. Maybe you shouldn't apply to this position. Maybe you shouldn't join the intelligence community. You want diversity of thought. You want different viewpoints. That makes us a stronger country. If you just have people that are just white and not encouraging different voices in there, you're not going to be we're not going to be safer. And so, look, I understand that the impact to Brennan is minimal. I understand that the president is doing this for political reasons. But what no one is discussing is the actual impact that this has in terms of the national security, which is what you're saying, Rev. I mean, this is something that has a chilling impact at a time when maybe a lot of people aren't going to want to join the intelligence community to begin with. If they're looking at this and saying, my goodness, I could join the intelligence community and have my security clearance revoked because of my political beliefs, I mean, that's just chilling.
Jane, I think that what bothers me more than anything, Matt, is that what he just said, Naveed just said, young people that want to get into the intelligence community that now become frozen saying, well, wait a minute, if I get in, am I no longer going to be able to, even in just casual conversations, family outings, express myself? Where are we going to draw the line here on where I can be in a position where my security clearance is revoked and that follow me on my resume the rest of my life and could impact my ability to make a living for me and my family? It's chilling to think what this could mean to the future of bringing in people that we need for intelligence gathering in this country to secure the people of the country.
Yeah, so there's a distinction in the federal government between career employees and political appointees. I was a political appointee at the Department of Homeland Security. I had a security clearance when I was there from 2003 to 2004. Most of the folks that are in the intelligence community, the analysts, like our guests here and our guest who was at the FBI, were career employees. Right. There should be no political screen whatsoever to career employees, none whatsoever. Political appointees should be appointed by the president and should align with what the president wants to do in terms of his agenda, his or her agenda. So I think that's the distinction. Yes, if it ever got to the point that Naveed's talking about where someone went into the CIA and got an interim clearance or a full clearance and they were 23 years old and they expressed a view privately at the agency and their security clearance was revoked because they expressed that view, that would be outrageous. I think it would be unconstitutional. I would oppose it with every fiber of my being. Well, that's not what we're seeing now. We're talking about former officials. I think it's an important distinction. Again, I'd like to see an independent criteria.
We're opening the door to what Naveed is saying. We can definitely get there because once you start saying former, present, or future, it's up to me, it's based on politics, it's based on, as you say, the news cycle, then who's to stop me tomorrow from the 23-year-old guy that's saying something by the water cooler? The door is open, and I think it will lead us to a dangerous place. Gotta go. Thank you both, all three of you, I should say, Nader Bakos, Naveed Jamali, and Matt Makoviak. Thank you all. After the break, a look back at the legendary career of Aretha Franklin. Don't go away.